Okay, good morning, everyone. Official welcome to Monday in week 13, the last week of the entire term, the last week of the 2020 term. I, for one, will be happy to get rid of 2020 in another month or so because it's been a tumultuous year, to say the least. Trying to remember like January of this year, and like I can just barely remember it. It seems like so long ago. Seems like 100 years ago. Anyway, let's say hello to people who are here. So, Miles is here. Good morning, Miles. And Clara's here. Good morning, Clara. Chan is here. Good morning. And Zion is here. Good morning. And Jack is here. Also, good morning. Gabrielle is here. Hi, Gabrielle. Sala's here. Good morning, Sala. Daniel's here. Good morning, Daniel. And as is Vicky. Hi, Vicky. And George is here. Hello, George. And John is here. Good morning, John. So they were trying to set up a law school for themselves. Sorry, I was muted for that whole thing. Basically, I just said what was on the slides for the most part. Sorry, you didn't miss anything. But I apologize. So Trinity Western was trying to set up a law school for themselves, and they needed to be approved by the Law Society of Canada, right? Because if you have a law program at your university, you train your students to be lawyers, and then they have to go and pass the bar exam, right? And when they pass the bar exam, then they get to be full lawyers. And so the Law Society of Canada is what makes sure that lawyers pass the bar and that they are legitimate, credible, properly trained lawyers. And so you need the Law Society to approve your law school if you want to have law students who can practice law, right? So this is important, right? And the Law Society of Canada said, actually, we feel that your community covenant or community agreement is discriminatory towards certain groups, and so we don't want to accredit your school. We don't want to approve your school until you fix that. Went all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada, and what did the Supreme Court of Canada, what did they rule?
They support
It's your choice to sign.
It's your choice to sign it or not? Well, that's not what the Supreme Court said. That was what happened at the end. But what did
the Supreme Court support the Law Society of Canada.
Right. So the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that actually the Law Society was allowed to not approve Trinity Western's law school on this basis. But again, it was a complicated case, right? Because on the one hand, we have Trinity Western University with their sort of freedom of religion and conscience and thought, right? They have the right to do that. And then there's also the right of people who are not married, right? Or people who are gay or lesbian or bisexual or something else to also attend this school. And so it's a complicated case, right? Two sets of rights are coming into conflict with each other. And so we watched a little video. It was this video here, 100 Huntley Street, and a couple of a biblical scholar, I think, and the executive director of Trinity Western spoke on this program, right? And they sort of expressed their views that they felt that the Supreme Court had ruled against them, and they didn't really like that. They felt that their freedom of religion was being taken away from them to some degree. And so they said, I think John Stackhouse, the professor, had said that he felt like the charter was turned on its head somehow. And so, again, I can see how he would feel that. But again, it's a complicated case, right, where two people's rights are kind of coming into contact and some sort of decision needs to be made. The video that I wanted to show you on Thursday that I had kind of lost in the shuffle was actually, was actually this one. And so it was a little video on just sort of demonstrating what kind of protests were happening at Trinity Western prior to the whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry, just one second. Prior to this court case being decided. And so what I want to do just very quickly is I just want to watch this video because I meant to watch it. I meant to have us watch it on Thursday. So I've just put the link in Microsoft Teams, and so online people will just watch this really quickly, and then we'll talk about what we see. Okay. again. Damn it. Damn it. Sorry, I was muted again. Having a rough morning here. I was so tired. I was so tired last night that I was just like, I just passed out, like completely. And this morning, like I was just barely awake, and my alarm went off, and I shut it off, and I just went back to sleep immediately. And fortunately, another alarm went off that woke me up. But yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just a little out of it. Sorry about the muting.
What did you do yesterday?
Yesterday I was kind of running around like doing groceries and stuff like that. I moved on the weekend, so that's why I wasn't here on Friday, because I had to move. So I was doing all kinds of like cleaning and carrying and moving stuff around and up and down stairs and back and forth and unpacking. And so, yeah, by the end of the weekend I was just no gas, no gas left in the tank. So I apologize for the muting. That's my sad story. It's not a sad story. Okay, so here you can see that the Law Society of Canada is kind of protesting with these LGBTQ students, because they're saying, well, if Trinity Western is discriminating, discrimination is kind of against the law. And do we want lawyers trained at an institution that is in the process of breaking the law? Is that a good thing? And the lawyers are saying, no, that's not a good thing at all, right? If you're going to be a good lawyer, you should follow the law, right? You should learn it and abide by it, right? But the lawyers, or Law Society of Canada, is saying that Trinity Western isn't abiding by it. And again, we talked about this on Thursday a little bit. Again, there's different ways to see this, and I think I asked you, what your perspective was on this, and if you wanted to share it. And I don't know. Do you think that the eventual resolution was a good one, where the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Law Society, and then Trinity Western in response made their community covenant an optional agreement rather than a mandatory one? You think that was okay?
Yeah, that was good.
That was good?
Yeah, but like if they make it optional, like people are not gonna sign it. Like, well, why would they sign something that disadvantages them? You know?
Right, and I think we pointed it out that there's kind of a dominant minoritized group thing happening here too, right? Because the dominant group are Christians, right? And so it's very easy for a Christian to sign an agreement that is in alignment with Christian values, right? And so, but for someone who might not be Christian, or who might be Christian and just have a more liberal interpretation of their Christianity, which there are many people like that, this is a difficult thing to sign, right? In the same way that Quebec's ban on religious symbols is very easy for you to go along with if you are not religious, or if you belong to a religion that doesn't really use a lot of symbols, right? So someone like me could very easily go along with that law and never break it, because I'm not very religious, and even if I was, I probably wouldn't wear any symbols of my religion that you would notice, right? But again, for Muslims, for Sikhs, for Jewish people, that's not as much of an option, right? And it's much more difficult for them. Let's see. Right, so we talked about that. This was just some of the background that we already know, just with a little more maybe dates. So this was in 2014, where the Law Society said, actually, we're not going to accredit your law school because we don't like your community covenant. We feel it's discriminatory. And then here we have, on June 15th, the Supreme Court decision, right, where they say that the community covenant deters LGBTQ, it doesn't say Q there, students from attending the proposed law school, and that equal access to legal education, diversity in the legal profession, and preventing harm to LGBT students was in the public interest, right? And so that's kind of the rationale for the Supreme Court's decision. And actually, when you think about it, it is their argument, right? The Supreme Court is providing their argument. This is why we decided the way we did. We're saying that Trinity Western is discriminating, and why, and that they shouldn't, and that the Law Society shouldn't or should be allowed to refuse an approval to Trinity Western. Why should everyone believe that from the Supreme Court? Well, because equal access to legal education is important. Having diversity within the legal profession is important. And preventing harm to LGBT students is also important, right? So they've got 3 premises and a conclusion, right? Right? Which they should, because they're lawyers, right? And so lawyers make arguments. That's what they deal in, is arguments. And so it's nice to see the Supreme Court doing that, right? And so here they're giving their ruling, but they're also explaining to you why you should believe that, why you should agree with the Supreme Court.
Are these their exact words or are they your words?
They are, I'm not sure whose words they are. I don't think they're mine. I think I borrowed them from somewhere, but I'm not sure from where. That would be plagiarism if I was claiming that, if I was claiming that this work is my own, but I'm not claiming that. So yeah, I don't think these are my words, but they are the premises, they are the supporting reasons for the Supreme Court's decision, right, for their argument. So again, you don't have to agree with the Supreme Court if you don't want to. Certainly the Christians that we heard interviewed on 100 Huntley Street don't agree, or at least didn't agree at the time. But to some degree, you can't. You can disagree with the Supreme Court, but you can't really do much about it because they're the final say in Canada. Okay, right. So then a couple of years ago, August 9th, 2018, the Board of Governors voted to make the covenant optional, which we already talked about. And the president of Trinity Western said that the change was so that the university could be inclusive of all students wishing to learn from a Christian viewpoint and underlying philosophy. All done, all fixed, right? I want to move on to something else, but are there any other questions or?
People who supported the Trinity Western signing and all, they didn't say anything about it?
People that supported, like students or staff or just members of the public?
Yeah, any.
Well, I think people did express their kind of disappointment or maybe frustration with the Supreme Court's decision. That's what we saw on 100 Huntley Street, right? So after the Supreme Court had ruled, they were interviewing people and they said, yeah, we think this really sucks. We think this is, not in alignment with charter values. We don't really agree with the Supreme Court. But again, the benefit and the problem with the Supreme Court is that it's kind of the last word, right? So if something gets all the way to the Supreme Court will decide, and then that's kind of it. There's no changing it. There's no appealing it. There's no higher court to go to.
And what if you challenge it or something?
You're done. So you start off, usually with something like this, you start off in lower courts, right? So if you were here in BC, this probably started out in a BC courtroom, and then it kind of moved up the chain that way, so to a federal court and then to the Supreme Court. And again, the Supreme Court only hears cases that it wants to hear. So you might want to take something to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court has to want to hear your case. And so here they heard it because it was kind of a charter issue, a charter of rights and freedoms and constitutional issue. And it also dealt with discrimination and the accreditation of lawyers and law schools. It's a big question, right? And so the Supreme Court then dealt with it.
The person who is the head of the Supreme Court,
What's that?
the person who is the head who decided, was he independent?
No, well, the Supreme Court is made up of a number of justices. So there's not just one. So, hang on, CANADA. I'm just going to pull up something here. Ooh, here we go. Welcome to the Supreme Court of Canada. Sorry, I'm just going to try and make this a little bit bigger for you. Yeah. So here, this may not be the same. It's probably the same lineup. These justices get appointed for life, so they're not going anywhere. So here we've got Chief Justice. Sorry, what does it say here? Richard Wagner. So he's kind of the spokesperson for the court. He's kind of the head of the court. But you can see here that these are the current.
So all of them are white.
Let's see. So here's Richard Wagner. Here's Rosalie Abella, Michael Moldover, Andromaki, oh boy, Karakatsanis, Suzanne Cote, Russell Brown, Malcolm Rowe, Sheila Martin, Nicholas Kassirer? Yeah.
Supreme Court. This is like a Christmas costume.
Yeah, they're at this time of year, it's very reminiscent of Santa Claus, isn't it? But here they are. This is the Supreme Court, and so they'll hear a case like this. So all of them will read the documentation, and they'll vote. And so it's not just one person making a decision; it's the entire court making a decision. And so sometimes you can see the let's see, Act and Rules, Media Visits, Library. Oh, you can go and visit the Supreme Court of Canada. Speeches, webcasts of ceremonies. I assume you could look it up and you could see what you can always tell what the votes are. So if there's how many are there here? 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah. So there's 9 justices. You always want an odd number, right? Because you don't want people to vote 4 and 4. That doesn't decide anything, right? You always need an odd number. So there's 9 of them. They vote, and sometimes you'll see that it was a 7-2 decision or a 5-4 decision or something. So they'll always tell you what the split was. But either way, once something goes to the Supreme Court, that's kind of it. There's no other recourse for you. And again, things have to, eventually things have to stop, right? Like eventually you have to get a decision on things, right? So again, there's lots of lower courts that you can move up through, but once you make it to the Supreme Court, that's it, right? You can't argue something forever. Eventually, things need to be decided, and so this is where they get decided.
And how are these members elected?
They are appointed by the Prime Minister. And so it's the Prime Minister's, as they say, prerogative. So it's his responsibility or his duty or his privilege. It's his prerogative to appoint Supreme Court justices. And so if one of these, where's the court photo here? Yeah, if one of these justices should resign, then Justin Trudeau will have to choose another one. But once they're appointed by a Prime Minister, they have their job for life. There's no way to get rid of them.
And the person has to be Canadian?
They have to be what?
Canadian?
Of course.
They have to be Canadian. Yeah. Usually there's someone who has been a judge in Canada before, and usually they have a very long, prestigious career as a lawyer and as a judge afterwards. And so they'll be appointed by the Prime Minister. But again, there's no way to really, as the Prime Minister, you can't really do much with the court unless somebody retires or dies, because these guys and women, this group of people are on there until they step down or until they die. So Justin Trudeau might be able to appoint another Supreme Court judge if somebody steps down, but I don't know, none of these people look super old. Actually, some of them look pretty young, right?
Like that lady?
What's that?
That the first lady was young?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
people like prestigious lawyer.
Yeah. They've all had very prestigious law careers and judicial careers, and so yeah, the Prime Minister will appoint them if somebody steps down. But if nobody steps down or dies, then you can't appoint anyone new. So they are the Supreme Court of Canada until they change it. Yeah, so this is it. This is the final decision in Canada. Yeah.
And what are the votes for the
What about the what?
what were the votes percentage for the school thing?
Oh, for like what the vote was? Whoops. Let's see if we can. Sorry, I know that wasn't very well typed. Oh, here. Oh, good. Here we go. So here's the judges. So the judge lineup was a little bit different. So Beverly McLaughlin was on there, and she's not on there now. Abea was on there. Moldovar, Karakatsanis, Wagner. This guy's been replaced here. Gascon, Clement Gascon is not there. I think Suzanne Cote was there. Russell Brown, yeah. So there was a couple of different Supreme Court justices, right? So here you can see, this is actually pretty cool. You can actually see the actual paperwork. So this is what the Supreme Court of Canada, this was the application to the Supreme Court of Canada, the Law Society of British Columbia versus Trinity Western University, right? And so you can actually see all of the legal.
That's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work to be as it turns out, it's a lot of work to be a Supreme Court justice. Look at all this stuff.
Oh.
I don't think they read it. They just looked at the final answer.
No, they get paid. They get paid to read this. They get paid to read this. So case number. What have we got here? Do we have a? I don't know. Does it say at the bottom? No. Case in brief. Reasons for judgment, date, breakdown of the decision. Oh, okay, so they have a vote. So the Supreme Court made their decisions based on those, I said there were those three premises. And so here you can see the majority. So Abea, Moldovar, Karakatsanis, Wagner, and Gascon. Gascon, yeah. So those five justices decided the way they decided for the reasons that we just talked about, for those three premises, okay? So here, these two others, McLaughlin and Rowe, they agreed with those other five justices, but for slightly different reasons, okay? So they had their own reasons for agreeing, but they're still saying that Trinity Western discriminated. And then there was two that disagreed. So Cote and Brown said, no, we don't agree with this decision. But again, the court is democratic as well, right? So Cote and Brown may not agree, but of course, the other 7 justices agree, either for the reasons that they published or for slightly different reasons. And so, yeah, and you can see all this too, which is actually kind of nice, right? The court is transparent in that way, that you can see who voted what way. There's a webcast of the hearings apparently, so you can watch that if you're so inclined.
What were the other 2 reasons?
For the concurring reasons, I don't know if that's stated. Nope, there's Beverly McLaughlin. Webcast of hearings, maybe under case information. I'll show you this. We got to get back on track here. We're going down a rabbit hole. But you can see the path that this has taken to the Supreme Court as well. So here you can see division. So this went to the court in Ontario and in, because I think the Law Society of Canada is probably centered in Toronto, in Ontario, and then Trinity Western is in BC. So this went through both the Ontario and the BC court. So you can see here, Divisional Court of Ontario, and then it was appealed at Court of Appeal for Ontario. In BC here, it went to the Supreme Court of BC. Then it went to the Court of Appeal in BC. And then it finally made its way to the Supreme Court. So this thing made its way through the courts for a while, right? It doesn't go straight to the Supreme Court, because hopefully things get resolved before you have to bring the Supreme Court in.
So like the Supreme Court does like really little work?
They what?
They do little work? Less work?
No, they don't do less work, but they only hear certain cases. And again, they only hear the big ones, right? The ones that have like effects for all of Canada, or if they deal with the criminal code, or if they deal with infringement on charter rights and freedoms, or if there's a constitutional issue. Like, it's big stuff.
So like the BLM movement doesn't go there?
The what?
BLM.
Well, it would, but you need a decision, right? You need a decision that is before the courts that needs to be made. So the members of the Supreme Court might have, they might have their views about Black Lives Matter and things like that, but they need a case needs to be put before them. So they can't just go around and make any decision they want. People have to actually come to them and say, look, we have this issue between the Law Society and Trinity Western. We need a decision. We need a ruling. And if the Supreme Court wants to hear your case, they'll say, okay, we'll hear it. Okay, let's not go down the rabbit hole too far there. What I would like to talk to you about next is maybe even a more contentious topic. And so this has to do with what's going on in France right now regarding I guess the conflict between the French state and between French Muslims, but not all Muslims. Does anyone know what's going on there? Can anyone kind of fill in the gaps for us?
I know someone killed someone due to like being a Muslim, I think, but I'm not sure.
Okay, so maybe what I'll do is I'll give you a quick overview of what's happening to the degree I understand it. And then we'll take a little break, and then we'll come back and we'll read an article, okay? So let's just see. To the degree that I understand it, what has happened here is that I think it was in 2015. French magazine, the magazine is called Charlie Hebdo. And the magazine published a number of cartoons, and in the cartoons, the Prophet Muhammad was in the cartoon. And he was doing silly stuff. I think he was naked at one point. It was supposed to be funny from the French perspective, okay? And so as a result, there was a pretty significant reaction from some parts of the Muslim community who were offended and upset by the cartoons. I believe the office of the magazine was targeted by violence and vandalism. A few people were killed. There was a very strong reaction within France. And more recently, when was it now? Might have been a month or so ago. A high school teacher in France wanted to have a lesson about freedom of speech, which is some of what we've talked about. And so the teacher showed the same cartoons in class on the screen, which, don't worry, I'm not going to do. But he showed them on the screen, and he said, okay, let's talk about freedom of speech, and is this okay, and is it not, or how should we decide what kind of things should be shown or said or not shown or not said? How do we make that decision, right? Again, it's the question of whose rights are more important, right? The rights of Muslims and respect for their kind of religious sensibilities and values, or the ability to simply say what you want because you're living in a society with freedom of speech. And it's a complicated question. And so again, as near as I can tell, this is what the teacher was trying to talk about in his class. Unfortunately, what happened is that news of that news of that class found their way into the hands of some people who were very upset hearing that those cartoons had been shown yet again. And the teacher, whose name is, I think, Samuel Paty, I think, he was brutally murdered in the street about a week later. Yeah, the teacher was, he was, yeah. So again, this is kind of a similar issue of kind of rights coming into conflict, the freedom of speech and freedom of religion kind of clashing, and how do we make a decision on this? And so this one's trickier, and it's also much more sensitive, right? And so, but I would like to read a little bit about this and kind of see what we think, okay? And again, I hope I'm not missing any important details in the story. I don't know every single, I don't know every single plot point of this entire situation, but that's what I know so far that has happened. And in the article, you'll read a little bit more about some of the things that have happened as well, and kind of what people's current feelings are about the issue, I guess is what we'll hear. Yeah. But before that, let's take a little break, and then we can come back and do some reading. Okay? All right. Okay, and we're back. Sorry. So like I mentioned, I have a short article for you to read, and it has to do with this kind of situation in France that is revolving around these cartoons about the Prophet Muhammad that are offensive to Muslims. And again, they are shown in a number of cases. They were published in a magazine in 2015, I think, and there was a lot of upset around that and violence that erupted. And here, in a classroom setting, they are being shown for a different reason. And again, I'm not saying that that's necessarily a useful distinction, but maybe it is. So again, they're not being shown for entertainment or for humor, but the teacher was trying to speak about free speech and showed the cartoons again. So again, I'm not saying that that's different, but I'm just saying it. So what I would like you to do, of course, is read the article. The article is in Microsoft Teams. It's called just what you see at the top here. France's teachers find classrooms are minefields, et cetera, et cetera. And so again, I'd like you to read the article. We'll talk about what the issue is, the issue that the article is raising. We'll talk about whose rights and freedoms may or may not be in the process of being violated. And then maybe we'll try to come to some sort of a decision, right, on how should we see this? Is somebody doing something right? Is somebody doing something wrong? Is it just hard to tell because this is a confusing case? Maybe it's not so confusing, I don't know, but we'll see what we think. Okay? All right, let's read. Oh, and if it helps, this word la cité is going to come up quite a bit, and in fact, Gabrielle already mentioned it, but la cité is kind of a French word meaning secularism. And what that means is that, you know, secularism, the idea of secularism is that you want a state, you want a government that operates free of any sort of religious influence. And so you make your government decisions based on science and reason and philosophy and things like that. You don't make your decisions based on religious ideals. That's what they're saying. Okay. just another couple minutes, okay? Okay. Can we talk about this? Okay. Where should we start? What are some of the issues that are swirling around this mess? There's at least 3 that I can identify, maybe more.
The children are closely tied with religion.
Children are?
Like the kids are,
Yep.
yeah, because of their upbringing in their religious family.
Right. So we have a community. I guess we have we have a community of people with whom they're a religious community, right? And their children are of course being brought up that way, which is normal and expected, right? What else is going on here?
Like it's a controversy about whether or not like the teacher is a hero or not.
Right. So there's and when I was reading this, I want to remind you about that concept of binary oppositions, right? You're either this, you're that. You're male or female, good, bad, up, down, hot, cold, right? Humans really like to, to categorize these things this way. And so, yeah, is he a hero or a villain, right? And, spoiler alert, but the real answer is probably somewhere in the middle. But again, there seems to be a move to kind of classify this teacher as a hero. Again, I'm not saying he is, I'm not saying he's not, but that's part of it. What else is going on here?
That the real issue being the poverty and joblessness, and then not being religious.
Right? So there's an apparent kind of issue of religiosity happening here, right? But one of the teachers points out the fact that, there are other things going on here as well that have to do with economics and opportunity, and people who have those financial opportunities and who have financial means, and then other people who do not, right? And so there's something happening there as well. What else is going on?
The issue between the freedom of speech and freedom of religion.
Right? There's the issue of freedom of speech versus freedom of religion. Is it okay for people to say or print whatever they want, even though those who are trying to practice a religion are deeply offended, right? And to oversimplify the entire case to say who's right, right? Who gets to have their rights respected and who has to take a step back, right? That's an open question so far in this. What else is going on here? Oh, there's so much. What about the murder itself? What's going on there?
He was murdered by 18 years old.
Yep, he was. So this teacher was later murdered by this 18-year-old guy. Why was he killed? How would you define what if I asked you what was his motive? What would you tell me? What's the motive here?
Like the boy was offended.
Right. So the boy was offended based on his religious values, right, and so committed the murder. There might be another answer to that too.
And the teacher was provoking kids, like religious.
Right. So what was the teacher doing? Right. Was he simply needlessly provoking people who he should have known would be upset, or was he, bravely championing free speech? The other thing I wanted to bring, so the murder, I think someone mentioned in the context of this article that that this 18-year-old was, I don't know, maybe that he had a mental health issue or something. Did that come up? Am I imagining that, or? I'm just trying to find it. Mr. Dean, who is a Muslim himself, said that Mr. Pati's killer was an unstable individual whose actions were not founded in any religion. What is worrisome, he said, was that France's politicians and media were no longer delivering that message. So again, there's the motive. Is he motivated by religion?
No.
Or is he motivated by some kind of mental health issue?
He's mentally unstable.
That's what Dean says, right? I don't know if that's true or not, but that's Dean's claim, right? Is that this guy is not, it's not a religious thing. It's a mental illness thing. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what is being said.
Did he get caught?
I think so.
He's in prison now?
I think so. Well, awaiting trial, of course. Anything else involved here? So there's freedom of speech, there's freedom of religion, there's kind of the nature and the motive behind this murder. There's the question of what this teacher was actually doing. Is he a hero or a villain? Did he do the right thing? What else is going on here?
Should they teach it at schools or not?
Right. So did he handle this discussion correctly, right? Because you could argue, and I'm not arguing, but you could argue that you don't actually need to see the images to have the discussion, because we're basically having the discussion now, and I'm not going to show you the cartoons, right? So it's possible to have the discussion without showing the material, but again, it comes back to the freedom of speech question. Should the teacher be able to show it, whether it, according to his choice, or did the teacher do something wrong in showing those images? I don't think anyone disputes the ideas that he was talking about, so the conversation, I think, was okay, but I think it's the showing of the images that is the, I think. What else? Anything else? There's a lot going on here. There's also a bit of prejudicial ideas, and this is not. I'm just going to add this in because it's part of what's happening here, but it's not in the article. The idea of when somebody commits an act of violence like this, okay, so whether it's a school shooter or whether it's this guy killing the teacher or whatever it is, how that person is described often depends on who the dominant group is and what the identity of the perpetrator is. And so is he mentally ill, or is he a religious fundamentalist, right? Is he a freedom fighter or a terrorist? Is he a militant or a patriot? Any of these things can be said of pretty much anyone who commits an act like this. But again, how they're defined depends a lot on who is in power and who the actual member of the group is. Okay, so let's look at question 2 here. What's going on? How do we, if we're the Supreme Court on this, and we don't have to make a decision here, but how do we go about making a decision on this issue? Who's done things right, who's done things wrong, and how can we decide what's right and wrong?
Yeah, in my opinion, like I don't think the teacher did anything wrong. Like he gets to teach whatever he can.
Right? There's a certain amount of academic freedom that teachers have, right? We're supposed to teach the curriculum, but how we do that and what we bring into the classroom is to some degree our choice within reasonable limits, right? The question is, I can't show you a pornographic film in this class for any reason, right? I could probably, create a lesson around it, but I cannot do that. So there are limits to what I can show you in here. But yeah, the question is, did this teacher cross the line with those cartoons or not?
No, but like the cartoon was published and everyone can see it. So like.
It's true, the cartoon is not his. The cartoon is already out there. I suspect if you Google the cartoon, you will find it. I didn't include it here, of course, but I'm sure it's out there. So it's something that's already out in the public space, right? People are already looking at it.
And it's not written that he was like saying that cartoons were right, so he was just teaching and like asking children to decide whether it was right or wrong.
Right. So the cartoon itself was not supposed to be. It wasn't for entertainment value, and it wasn't trying to sort of reinforce one thing or another. It was simply trying to inspire his students to think about freedom of speech. And I think they mentioned here that he had cartoons with other religious figures as well, right? Jesus was in there, and God was in there, and I don't know if Buddha was in there, I forget. But there were a few other kind of major religious figures who were also portrayed in cartoon form, right? And so, again, there might have been a little bit of context or intent about what this teacher was trying to do. I think he did. I think what he did is he warned his students that he was going to show these images, and if you didn't want to see them, or if you would be offended or uncomfortable, you could always, go to the library for half an hour or something. You could leave. So I'm not positive about that, but I think he gave students the ability to opt out of the lesson if they were going to be made uncomfortable or be offended by the images. I think. Is this one more difficult than the Trinity Western one? More complicated? Why do you think it's more complicated?
Like, because
I don't think there's any right or wrong here. Like, both of them, like, both have their reasons.
But Samuel Patty is dead, so I imagine he would have some opinions about who is right and wrong. But I see your point. But I wanted to throw that in as well. So I agree with you in some ways, but also in other ways I don't. But sorry, Daniel?
like as you said in 2015, they already talk about the cartoon, right?
Yep.
So it's pretty, it's super sensitive. Like should not bring that to his class.
Mhm.
However, like he was just doing his job and he did not force his student to believe in what he believed, right? So it's kind of against that, but it's hard to decide who's right and who's wrong.
It is tough, right? And it is tough because there are, again, there are different perspectives, right? There's different groups involved, and again, different freedoms are coming into contact here, right? And so, if I go to Trinity Western University, then I should have the right to go to that university. And even though the people who run the university have certain values, I don't have to agree with or practice those values for the most part, right? There are, I should be allowed to go there as a student and learn and get my education. And even if I don't, believe in the things that the sort of Christian heads of the university believe in, I should be allowed to sort of think what I want, right? As long as I don't interfere with their beliefs and they don't interfere with my activities, then we should be okay. But this one's a little different, even so, right? Because as you mentioned, it wasn't an accident, right? We know, because from 2015, we know how some members of the French community and the Muslim community, we know that they will be pretty significantly upset, right? So again, we don't want to assume everyone in the Muslim community feels exactly the same way, but the evidence suggests that showing these cartoons makes people pretty unhappy, right? But how do we figure out whose rights should take precedence? Do teachers and the publishers of the Charlie Hebdo magazine, do they have the right to simply publish whatever they want and Muslims just have to deal with it? Or should people like the magazine and maybe people like teachers, should they be required to not show these things because doing so violates other people's freedom of religion? Where do we draw the line between these two things?
Well, even if it violates, there cannot be like a fact to kill someone on it within reasonable limits. I think disagreeing with it is okay.
Right, and so we should probably say that off the top, and because this is something that I definitely feel about this case, and that I hope you will all agree with me, is that the murder is wrong, right? In any context, you are not allowed to go around and murder people in society for any reason, right? It doesn't matter if they infringed on your rights or offended you or simply cut you off in traffic and annoyed you. It doesn't matter. You are not allowed to murder them, right? And so the murder is clearly wrong, right? Whatever its motivation may or may not have been, the murder is wrong, right? And so that I can pretty unequivocally state that you can't murder people in society for any reason, no matter who you are. But should teachers and magazines be censored to some degree? Should they be required not to show these images because of how upsetting they are to certain groups? Or do certain groups just have to, if they don't want to see it, don't look at it? Or is there a more complicated position that we can arrive at? I think what he was trying to do, I think he was trying to have the exact conversation that we are having now. I think that's what he was trying to do. What's that? I know. If only Samuel had contacted me first, I could have told him what to do. I don't know how to have a conversation like this either, but it's useful to identify the different groups of people and perspectives that are involved, and what rights are in play, right? What rights and freedoms are in play, how those rights might be exercised or violated, and then what's the priority, right? Because we can't necessarily have the images like this published and not published at the same time, right? They're either we're either allowed to circulate these images in society or we're not, right? We kind of have to make a decision there. But I mean, whose rights are more important here? What does the French government think? What's their perspective? Because I think we can kind of pull that out of this article. What's the French government's approach to this?
That they can publish it?
Yeah, so the French government is pretty clearly committed to their laïcité, or their secularism idea, right? And so they think that, yeah, they want a secular society, and so these images should be able to be circulated, right? It is interesting, and I'll point this out to you. We may have to carry this over into tomorrow because we're going to run out of time, unfortunately. But it is interesting that in this article, we have a couple of perspectives represented, right? So clearly, teachers are represented because they're talking to teachers. The French government, to some degree, is represented because we're hearing about the things that the French government has said and what they're telling teachers to do. But the Muslim community is not represented here, are they? Beyond the fact that some teachers, Muslim students, are divided on the issue. But the Muslim community, whatever they may or may not have said about this issue, they're not a part of this discussion, which is interesting, I think. What's that? I imagine that he was not. I imagine he was from a Christian background. I don't know if he was Christian. Yeah, I don't know that information. I think he was a white French person, as far as I'm aware, anyway. Do you think what the French government is doing? Do you think that's do you think they're doing? Do you think they're responding to this in an appropriate way, or? What's that? They're the latte government.
Like they don't base on religion.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what are they asking teachers to do? The government.
They allow the teacher to show that.
Well, yeah, but as a result of this murder. Right. So they're not allowing homeschooling anymore. Why are they not doing that?
Because kids' beliefs are interfering with each other, with what their parents are teaching and what they learn in school.
Right. So the French government seems to be worried that kids are picking up values at home that are in conflict with the values of the French state, right? And the French state wants the opportunity to teach those kids the correct, quote unquote, values, right? Or the values that are of the French state. And so again, let me remind you back to the beginning of the course. I think I said education is a political project, right? The things that you know and the way that you know them has to do with who is in power in society. And here you see it happening very clearly as the government attempts to gain tighter control over the education of children so that they can give them the correct, quote unquote, values, or the values that are kind of in alignment with the state. Okay. That's all the time we have for today because we're out of time. Makes sense, right? Tomorrow, come back. We'll try to wrap this up. Maybe we can say something definitive about this particular case. You can think about it some more until tomorrow. But I'll see you then, and then we'll move on to the last little topic, which is classism. Okay. So until then, I will see you tomorrow. Okay?
Quiz on Wednesday, right?
Quiz on Wednesday.
Will we be able to finish classes?
Sure. Sure we will. Well, no, but we'll get to put our toe into it anyway. So, okay. Bye, people.